So, hello to everybody, dear comrades and friends. Kalispera, good evening from Athens. I understand that we are all now present and can start our debate. I am Marilisa Xenogiannakopoulou. I'm member of parliament from Syriza and responsible for labor and social policy in our parliamentary group. And I have the pleasure of moderating our tonight's debate. Just for information, the debate will be broadcast via Facebook, the Facebook of European Forum, live, and it also will be recorded and published following in the website of the European Forum. I'd love to have welcomed you all here in Athens. Unfortunately, with the pandemic crisis, this is not possible, and we really hope and look forward to having our meeting in Athens next year. This last month, I think that we are facing a multiple crisis in all our countries, all over Europe, a health crisis, economic and social crisis. Our common preoccupation is to face the immediate challenges and social problems and to ensure that after the pandemic, a swift economic recovery will be possible with the necessary European and national policies, ensuring first of all jobs, wages, and strong social policies. It is true that during the last months, because of the pandemic, certain steps have been made at European level, namely the turn from the austerity policy that was applied during the last years to a more expansive economic policy, and the decision on the recovery fund. But it's true also that there is still a lot to be done. These are only just some first steps. And for all left and progressive forces that have struggled all these years for a political change in Europe, of course, these are challenging times. The struggle continues in order to consolidate and expand these first steps. The crisis we're facing affects work and working people all over Europe and in all our countries. It affects jobs, salaries, and working hours. It has accelerated digital change and transformation and increased distance working in many of our countries, including my country here in Greece, without any rules and without any safeguards. It is true, and we all understand that following the pandemic crisis, we have to face a new and very different world. As our debate motto says, unparalleled crisis call for radical solutions, because this pandemic crisis has caused the increase of unemployment, and we are afraid that there are a lot of more challenges and difficulties to face. So our debate today, the theme that we have to discuss is what new model for production and work facing the explosion of unemployment. I think it's a topical and crucial issue. And we have the privilege tonight to have with us important speakers and comrades that have a long and important political experience. So permit me to refer to our speakers in order of their introduction and intervention. So we would like to welcome Fabien Roussel, National Secretary of the French Communist Party. Yolanda Diaz, the Spanish Minister of Labor, has warned us that she'll be a bit late, but we hope to welcome her soon, but she will not be possible to stay for the question time. Luc Triangle, General Secretary of Industrial. Gianni Rinaldini, ex-General Secretary of FIOM from Italy, Kim van Sparentak, Member of European Parliament with the Green Group from Netherlands, Edward Martin, former Member of European Parliament for the Social and Democratic Group from France, Carolee Gergi, I hope I'm pronouncing well all the names. My name is the most difficult of all, so please have some patience with me. So Carolee Gergi, International Secretary of Hungarian Alliance of Trade Unions. So these are our speakers. I would like especially to thank Lena Shapiro for supporting and helping for the organization of our debate. I would like to thank our rapporteur, Enrique Carmona, who will write a report following our discussion. And of course, I would like also to thank our interpreters who make possible that our debate can be followed in many languages all over Europe in all our countries. So, some practical details before we start. We have planned that our debate will last 2 hours until 8 o'clock Greek time, 7 o'clock Brussels time, continental time. So what we propose is that each speaker has 6 minutes. Let's try to stay on time so that we can have enough time to receive and answer questions. And so that from 7:10 to 10 to 8, we can receive the questions, and then we can have the conclusions for our debate. As you know, we have translation in French, English, Spanish, Russian, Italian, and Greek. So let's begin. I'm very happy to start with Comrade Fabien Roussel. Fabien, if you would like to take the floor.
Merci pour ce mot introductif.
Well, thank you for this introduction. Thank you for this warm welcome. Thank you to the interpreters and to the organizers of this event. We'd also like to thank Marie-Lisa, my dear colleague. Thank you for this warm welcome. Thank you for this nice introduction. Well, I wanted to introduce this theme in a few minutes' time, and I would like to refer, among other things, to what's going on in my country. Europe, for a long time, has been an area for economic competition, which is feeding mass unemployment and which is impoverishing the states. This was the case before the current crisis, but this crisis is worsening the process. So we should actually wonder about the true reasons of such a skyrocketing figure in unemployment figures, endemic unemployment, which is damaging Europe, which has been damaging Europe for years now. So this is, we believe, the fruit of the capitalistic management of our system, capitalism, which tries to strongly increase the domination of capital, which also tries to reduce the cost of labor and creates competition between the peoples. It also tries to reduce their rights, their level of protection, but also at the same time by reducing tax on capital. On their part, workers, natural resources, and climate are facing more and more troubles, more and more problems, and are being exploited when the states get more or get less and less tax. So everybody is losing in this scheme except the banks and the shareholders. That's a financial market. Now, if you take a global view, you see that competition is being organized. It is organized through the full liberalization of the markets and an economic, commercial, and trade war, a permanent war, which is organized in Europe with treaties like European treaties that actually foster free competition, but also social and tax dumping procedures. And we also see a monetary policy carried out by the European Central Bank, which is at the full service of the financial markets and not at the service of employment, the states, and public services. So this economic and health crisis is like a social tsunami that we must handle. We must handle it and actually resist the choices of the multinational companies. We should also feed our struggle and come up with proposals and show that it is urgent to stop the current financial rationale. we see it today in France. This health crisis is an opportunity for the financial markets and for large industrial groups to speed up the pace of delocation or relocation of their activities and jobs. This also has an impact on subcontractors which work with the multinational companies. So the consequences are terrible for workers, their families, but also for entire regions across France, which sometimes are losing a structured economic activity for a whole area, depending on those jobs. So these companies are leaving our countries, and because of that, we will receive less tax. And since we are now facing products which are built outside France or outside the EU and which actually enter our country through containers or trucks, this has an impact on climate at the same time. So it is a triple sentence. We believe it's bad for jobs, it's bad for tax for the state, and it's bad for the climate. So this is why we claim that this delocation is criminal. It kills our regions, our countries. It throws men and women onto the street. It causes suicide. So this delocation or relocation is allowed by our government on behalf of freedom of competition. And sometimes it actually even enjoys financial support with public money or even from the recovery plan. There is a very French and striking example to clarify that. That's the example of Bridgestone. In my region, in my city where I was born and raised, you have this Japanese group that is a tire manufacturer. Well, this group has organized the overcapacity of its production. They have invested in Hungary and in Poland. They have increased the production capacity of their plants there. And actually, they decided to close the plant in Béthune, France. So the tires we'll need in our country in the future will actually come by truck to France. But in the meantime, they have caused unemployment, a loss in tax revenue, but also a bad carbon footprint because of those imports through trucks or ships sometimes. So I could give you dozens of such examples which are taking place as we speak in our country. So how can we resist, and what are the alternatives? What other policies can we opt for facing these situations? Well, we're all facing this short-term financial rationale, which is destroying jobs, production, the environment, and climate. We have three main proposals to face that. First, given the current organization of competition between the people, we propose that there should be an economic sovereignty, an industrial sovereignty of the states. And by saying this, first, we say that the state and politicians should take over the power of boards of management and shareholders. We should have the possibility to give more power to the workers in the companies, because the workers are those who raise the alarm and who explain to us the industrial rationale that will lead to delocation, which is unfair delocation. Then we should not just consider closing our national borders. We propose to cooperate within the EU. The purpose is to organize European sectors, industrial sectors in the EU to meet the needs of the peoples of Europe. And we will be able to work together to aim and achieve this goal. So let's take Renault, the car manufacturer, big group that you know. Renault has decided to invest in China to produce the Dacia Spring. It's an e-car, a popular, cheap car. It will be made in China, and then it will flood the market here in the EU. But this car could have been produced here in the EU for the EU market. So this is an e-car, an electric car. It meets an environmental demand. But when it arrives here in the EU through huge container ships, its carbon footprint will be higher than diesel cars, actually. So this is the world upside down here. Secondly, we need to promote cooperation rules between the EU member states, and we should actually turn our back on social dumping and procedures and tax dumping procedures. And eventually, we also need a harmonization policy when it comes to tax and social matters within the EU. We should no longer create competition between our peoples and our states according to their wages and the tax that they pay in their respective member states. It is urgent that we take action because we need to do this today. This is the cause today that causes most relocation in our countries or from our countries. There's a third priority. We want a reorientation of the wealth produced, that is the money, to provide an answer to the human needs. We want to increase public services, important services. Today, we have seen that the recent years EU austerity policies have really weakened our public services in the EU, especially when it comes to healthcare. So today, we understood that we need these health public services to face the current pandemic. So, or to actually start a vaccination policy that would enable each and every one of us to have access to a vaccine that would be paid 100% for by the public policies. So this is something that we need in our EU member states. We need a health policy that will enable us to find the best answer to the pandemic. In France, we'll have over 50,000 dead people because of the pandemic, 50. And for different reasons, but one of them is that we are underprepared to have and host many people in our hospitals, especially in intensive care units. So we'd also like to have a European Central Bank which is no longer independent. It should be monitored by the states and the people of Europe. It should be under the control of the parliaments to make sure it plays a decisive role and supports industrial investment, but also to support the creation and development of public services, as opposed to what happened these years. Now, I could have spoken much more time on those proposals and others, but since I don't have much time to speak, I will stop now. But anyway, my conclusion is that you have seen that we are tabling proposals. And it's all about getting united to implement an economic system which is completely different from the one that has led us to the current weakened situation of our states, which causes also competition between our people and which makes it impossible for us to meet the needs linked to the current pandemic. Thank you for your attention.
Yolanda, the floor is yours.
Buenas tardes, es un placer estar junto con vosotras.
Good afternoon, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you and to be able to say hello. And I'm just a representative, humble representative of the left in Spain right now in the government as Minister of Work and Social Economy in my country. It is a true pleasure to be here today with you and to be able to share with you this very short time and space. I think that the reflections that we're going to have in this forum are going to determine the future of the left in Europe and also our way out of this crisis that has served to show that in this huge pandemic that we are suffering right now, and we have seen that it has become a very important economic crisis, even worse, a terrible social crisis. So right now we have a second crisis in less than 10 years, and it is again a world crisis. and we see that it's a new type of crisis. We have seen the problems that we have. It has served to show the inequality present in the capitalist system. So this huge lack of justice, and we believe that the way out of this crisis from Europe, here, the left also, we have to try to address it. We have recent experiences, specifically in Europe, where we were not successful in the way that the crisis was addressed, and this generated great pain, important social exclusion, unemployment, suicide. It was really terrible, and we have seen important fractures, specifically in the South, division. We have also seen this, for example, in the Greek case, and austerity measures that we could explain, and we could maybe summarize in the impact, terrible impact this has had on the popular classes. So we see that in Europe, in this, the way the crisis was managed was not adequate, and we needed to try decent ways to get out of the crisis, and we needed to have an adequate civilization project, Europe, that was able to show the best part of itself in the management of the previous crisis. In this situation that we have right now, the inequalities of the capitalist system, we see the divisions, and we've seen the collapse also of the different social systems and the welfare states that have shown the consequences of privatization and the impoverishment of public services. Now we're seeing the results. We are seeing the impact, the way the public health system in all our countries, what has happened to these health systems. This has served to show also the poverty that we have, the lack of protection that we have, and we need to come together and defend Europe, a Europe that will focus on social protection, the increase of minimum salaries that can defend public services with quality that are extensive and that will not be turned into pure business. Europe has promoted, and now we see the consequences, has promoted a system that is focusing on an activity that is purely financial, away from an industrialization process with delocation and outsourcing. And we have seen this in our different countries, and it's a terrible formula of leaving aside, of leaving our countries and to go far away and promoting social dumping, environmental dumping, and different types of inequalities just to increase profit without tools. Now we are left without tools to be able to address this reality, a capitalist system that is showing increased inequality regarding women, for the crisis that we have seen right now, crisis in the care system. And we need to correct this situation with a feminist approach regarding care and co-responsibility, which should be at the center of our societies. A capitalist system in Europe that has shown its worst face, the worst face of our people, with an old Europe that is kicking out the youth, that is commoditizing them and not providing them a decent future. So Europe needs to change. and we see the emergencies and urgencies of the health crisis. It's a driver of the double transition for the European economy, two basic pillars. We have technological transition, environmental transition. It's a process that cannot be stopped, that has already transformed and will continue transforming in the next years the way we produce, the way we work, and also the way we live. We see the fog that the pandemic is leaving behind and does not allow us to clearly see the near future, but we need to be aware of the historical times we're living right now, maybe comparable to the Industrial Revolution, but it's going even quicker than back then and presenting huge challenges as a society. When there are challenges in society, there are challenges for the left, for the different left parties, and challenges that make us pose the following question: what will be the social economic model that will be here and with which we will live? And the second question, who is going to govern and guide this double transition? This is our challenge for the left: double transition, technological and environmental transition. This is essential. The answer for these two questions are fundamental, and our future will depend on our answers, because we are aware from the left that the transition process, these disruptive moments that we are living, are essential, are painful, specifically for people, citizens, sectors, activity sectors, and even territories that are not leading these changes, these transitions. So the forum in which I am participating here today should provide an answer to these two questions. Otherwise, it would be a mistake not to answer them. We are addressing a huge change in the productive model. We need to have answers in proximity, answers that are aware of the needs of workers, of women, of pensionists, of the youth, that do not repeat mistakes of the past, do not promote inequalities that could be brought about in these transitions. The proposals of the left in this process of change should provide balance, a balanced answer. And this first reflection that we have when we debate, for example, with trade unions, is that the left in Europe cannot be the Ludovites of the 21st century. We cannot go against this new revolution. We need to accompany it, and to go against this would make us insignificant, or at least have this risk. We could even disappear as a political option, and we need to be there also in power. Robotization, artificial intelligence, big data, digitalization offer the possibility for society to get rid of the more repetitive task and the most important burdens. So we should accompany this, and the green transition could take us to circular economies with renewables and can bring about well-being without going against the ecosystems. We only have this planet. There's no planet B. Another key element essential for all of us is to provide an answer before the situation that we have in our societies. We have the general feeling of society of not feeling well, of uncertainty felt by so many people. They're losing their rights, their labor rights, social protection rights, right to housing, and right, in short, to a decent life. So unfortunately, this unease has been generated, and there are some populist parties from extreme right parties are seeing tools that they can use. We cannot leave anyone behind. We need to be ambitious. We need to have the will to govern this transition, and we cannot leave behind those that are suffering. They are part of us, they are one of us, and they deserve receiving answers to current problems. The question is, are we providing what they need? If they feel excluded, they are going to seek other answers. And I think this is the issue that is important for all of us that we need to address. So we see the booming of right-wing parties, and we need to be critical. We need to address the negative effects of this process, and at the same time, with necessary alternatives and proposals, then can provide an answers to the demands of the current society. The left, as representative of the social majority, needs to have more positions, needs to face the challenges, the risk, and there's a danger if we don't have adequate people in power. And right now, the situation is of great concern. We see that large multinationals are the ones leading technological change. And right now, we are between multinationals from the US, and we also see important Chinese corporations, and we're in the middle. So we have the huge concentration power of the banking sector, also in some sensitive areas, monopolies, for example, regarding storage of data, and they use this to not comply with specific rules. At the same time, we also see the situation regarding tax regulation. As you already know, and this is what we see in our different countries, we see that US corporations are not paying taxes in the countries in which they operate, or the huge labor risk, important labor risk, and we have delocalization, but at the same time, we have the platform economy that is mining our labor models. And this is part of our pillars, the pillars of our societies. We need to build together with the European citizenship. We need to have a Europe that is truly democratic. This is what is at stake right now in the pandemic. And it is also at stake democracy, as I was saying, and the future is at stake, the future of Europe. We need to provide social answers. If we don't provide them, answers won't be democratic. We need to go against monopolist practices from different points of view, legal point of view, economic point of view, and also the possibility that was defended in the Democrat Party of the US. We see that we need to fragment, divide huge monopolies, and we need to progress regarding these issues. We need to reinforce the tax systems, also with the creation of new taxes that allow us to have public services, quality public services, and that also provides welfare for our societies. We need to redistribute with equality the results of our production, the benefits of our production in this new revolution, and we need to adapt the working time and working schedule. This is also essential and will be brought about with these technological changes, and we have seen sometimes increase of productivity, and we might need to consider new times, new schedules. We also need to have policies to protect citizens and that for them to serve for an adequate redistribution. And at the same time, it is essential that we need to establish universal basic incomes. One of the elements of a model of a good rated work, decent work, also decent work conditions, salaries that are also decent. This is essential, and this would serve to promote and to progress in Europe. There needs to be social, there needs to put an end to the gender pay gap and inequalities between men and women, and that fights against the poverty that we also have of the working poor. We need to do something about this. We need to go against the figures that we have regarding this phenomena. And we also need to have this feminist approach, and we need to address care policies. We need to have work-life balance, but go beyond this, a true equality between men and women, co-responsibility. And in companies, women cannot be the ones that leave work to address care. For example, the impact this will have on our professional careers and later on social protection. Companies will need to adapt to care. And we need to recover public elements in the economy, in strategic sectors. They need to be addressed and defined from the public, from a point of view that as public service. So delocalization, we need to go against this, and decisions are taken in boards, taking into account how they're going to pay shareholders, the payment of dividends. So we need to have boards or public policies, industrial policies that are defined, taking into account strategic interests of the sectors and not solely the personal interests of board members, for example, who only care about distributing and paying dividends. In this Europe that is becoming older, and this is a phenomenon that we have right now to promote industrialization that needs to change the current paradigm. So in short, the left in Europe needs to be an important actor of this political change. We need a left that is strong, that is empathetic, that also feels the social classes, popular classes. We need to love them and they need to love us. We need to be very close to their needs. A left that is well organized. Otherwise, if we don't do this, in the end, we will not have a social Europe, and therefore there will be no social change in Europe. Is the Europe of markets. This has been the worst product of the previous economic crisis, and now we are suffering the consequences. So just to finish, I would like to highlight that this is the huge challenge that we have right now. We need to bring out the best of ourselves, and we need to fulfill our duty, which is to give hope to our people. So thank you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Gracias, Yolanda. Thank you very much for your speech and sharing your thoughts with us. And now I would like to turn to Comrade Luc Triangle, General Secretary of Industrial.
Thank you very much. I hope I can be heard by everyone. So indeed, Industrial Europe, we are the European Trade Union Federation, organizing 200 industrial trade unions, and they are organizing sectors in industry, in manufacturing, and in energy throughout Europe, and not limited to the European Union. So in total, 38 countries. I want to focus on the current reality and on the ways out of the current reality, because the current reality is absolutely dramatic for millions of workers today in Europe. First of all, before COVID-19, we were already faced with transformation and with transition. They have already been raised, these evolutions, by the previous speakers, but let me repeat them. It's the implementation of the climate agenda, the targets for 2030 and 2050 on the longer term, combined with the further digitalization in our industries. These realities were already very challenging for millions of workers, for millions of jobs, and also for regions in particular. Regions are hard hit in certain countries by these transformations, and today I had already several meetings with our coal miners in Poland, but also with our energy intensive industries in Eastern Europe, in Romania, Bulgaria, and other countries about the effects of these transitions for them. On top of that, we are now faced with COVID-19, and this accelerated actually the challenges. What for us is important as trade union, and that was also our first focus in the beginning of the pandemic, is the focus on the health and safety of our workers. Millions of workers were forced to stay at work And this sometimes in very unsafe conditions. We have cases where workers have been affected by COVID-19 at the workplace. There is a huge responsibility for companies and for individual employers who didn't take care of the health and safety of their workers. But health and safety was also central when in June, many companies wanted to reopen and restart production. Also there we focused on health and safety. But in that period, May, June, we were already faced with the first wave of restructuring. Massive restructuring started already in May and June. And sometimes, and maybe even more than sometimes, the COVID-19 pandemic was used as an argument, as an excuse to do restructuring, and actually to use the pandemic to try to justify it. Today, we are faced in Europe, I don't know whether you realize the numbers, but we are faced with 40 million people, workers, who are on temporary unemployment. They didn't lose the job yet, but they are not at work, and they don't know whether they can restart the job. On top of these 40 million, we have 20 million people that did lose their job. They don't have a job anymore. This is the current reality. So we are faced with a second and a third wave of restructuring already today. And this puts the employment in many of our sectors in Europe at risk. Just to name a few sectors. In the automotive sector, we lost already more than 120,000 jobs. And I'm talking only here about the car manufacturers and about the first tier suppliers. I'm not talking about the second tier suppliers or the third tier, which are often based in Central and Eastern Europe or just at the outskirts of the European Union, in the Western Balkan or in Turkey. We don't know these numbers for sure, but the magnitude of the impact of this crisis in those countries is absolutely extremely high. We have it also in the aerospace sector, where 1,000 shops are now also going to be at risk or are at risk and maybe lead to restructuring and to dismissals. The steel sector, we had a successful steel action day on the 1st of October, but also there we are losing half of the capacity of steel if we don't take immediate action. And I just name a few of the sectors in industry, but the reality is much worse also in other sectors. So we can see that this crisis is being misused by many to do restructuring. But not only to do restructuring, also national governments misused it to do labor market reforms, to put pressure on workers' rights, to put pressure on trade unions' rights, and to increase flexibility for workers. So we say, okay, we don't have the same austerity agenda as in 2008, 2009, but I would say don't make too much victory at the moment, because it's not over. We are just at the start, and the risk that we go back to labor market reforms, the risk that we go back to an agenda which is close to the austerity agenda of 2008 and 2009 is certainly there. Now we have the recovery plan, the 750 billion euro. Okay, we welcome that, because this is indeed an investment program that we need. But is it a good one? We will see. First of all, we don't see trade union involvement. We don't see involvement of workers in this plan, in this recovery plan, not at national level, not at European level. Yes, in certain countries, they involved the trade unions in setting the priorities and drafting the action plan for the recovery, but it's certainly not a certainty. And so what is the risk is that this recovery plan might be used by certain multinationals, by certain sectors, by certain employers groups to put pressure on governments to get part of the money to stay in the country. So we see, if we don't coordinate our European approach, that this recovery plan might lead to a reality where workers are played off against each other, where national governments are indeed putting pressure on workers to do collective bargaining commitments or concessions, to lower wages in order to keep jobs in the country. So if we don't have a strong European coordination in this recovery plan, we will actually at the end of the day all lose, and it will not create new jobs. And that's the third point. For us, a recovery plan, what does it need to do? It needs to create jobs and it needs to maintain jobs. And that's the crucial dimension that this recovery plan must have, and nothing else. We are not here to finance companies to indeed continue to pay out shareholders dividends with public money received from the 750 billion recovery. That's not the meaning of the recovery plan. So we must put social and fiscal strings to the recovery plan. That means you get money if you don't use the money for restructuring, if you invest in jobs. Yes, you get money if you pay your taxes, if you have fair taxation in the company, if you don't commit yourself to tax evasion. So these are logic and not radical commitments that we must get from the European level and from the national governments in order to facilitate money to sectors and to companies. We have to look to the most vulnerable groups. It was already mentioned, young people. Last year in August 2019, the official rate of unemployment among youngsters in the European Union was 6%. Now we are already 18% and more, and it's going to increase further on. So we are not about doubling, we are about already tripling it now with 1 year ago, and it will further increase. So young people are, again, the ones that are most hit together with women. Don't forget, women, female workers today in industry are also victim and more hit by the current crisis. Care facilities have been closed. If care facilities are closed, who pays the bill? Who pays the bill? Well, that's also the reality today for many industrial workers, female workers, who are faced with that reality. Then precarious workers, millions of precarious workers, well, they don't benefit from the income schemes that are launched by a number of governments. Precarious workers are left behind also in this crisis. A lot of national governments are saying that they are taking everybody on board in the supportive mechanisms for income. Well, forget it. In the reality, yes, a lot again benefit from it, but a lot don't. And they are left behind in the supporting schemes for the moment in many countries. Another point, this recovery plan might increase further the inequality in Europe. The inequality is there. I don't know whether we realize, but if you take the United Nations index, and the United Nations covers all the countries in the world, well, the top 10 countries where we are faced with the highest percentage of emigration, people leaving the country, the top 10 are all European countries. 7 out of the 10 countries of the United Nations top 10 are EU countries, where most people are leaving the country to find a future elsewhere. Nobody in the European Union talks about that, but that's the European Union today. The European Union is not one union. There are different unions, and there are rich parts in Europe, but there are very poor parts in Europe, and they don't bridge the gap. The European Union doesn't help them to bridge the gap. The wages in Bulgaria, in Romania are still unacceptably low, so low that we see now that the textile industries are reshoring production from China back to the European Union. Okay, that's the reality. Reshoring production from China back to Europe, to the Western Balkan, but also inside the European Union, because the wages are low, too low, and they are staying low. This is, and if we don't use the recovery plan right, then we might risk that this inequality becomes bigger, because the money will maybe be used by the rich, and the poor countries don't get the money that they need, and the inequality will become bigger. And don't forget that Europe is not the 27 member states of the European Union. We have the Western Balkan, we have Turkey, we have other countries. Well, I can tell you, in the last 2 months, I had my meetings individually with all the countries, going from Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, EU country, but also other countries like Turkey. Well, I can tell you that we don't realize what this current crisis means for these countries. Well, to come to solutions, it's not going to be easy. But if we want to have a fundamental debate about the future, well, then it's clear that we need to talk about work organization. How are we going to redistribute the work available in Europe? And that means that we need to have the debate about working time. There are different views in our federation on working time, but that we need to debate working time and working time reduction is absolutely a crucial element for the solution. The same with all the new forms of work organization. A lot of people are now working from home. well, working from home. Well, the work-life balance has never been so bad. We don't do the traffic jams anymore, maybe, but the mix between professional life and private life is completely blurred. So also here, companies are now disinvesting in offices. They are selling offices now because they say the future is work from home, and we organize it. And in the meantime, people are working actually from the morning early till day night, even in the weekends, because they're continuously online. So for us as trade unions, colleagues, the solutions are unity and solidarity. If we are not careful, we are going to be played off against each other. And member states are going to do that, and member states are going to play us off against each other. And multinationals are going to use us to be played off against each other. So for us, and that was also the debate we had this week in our executive committee for 2 full days with 170 presidents and general secretary of industrial trade unions, we all agreed that solidarity and unity is important, because multinationals and national member states will play us off against each other if we don't stay united. So I can only support the messages that have been expressed before, that indeed the left in general need to stick together. And we are only successful if we can indeed stay in unity and in solidarity. Thank you very much.
Luke, thank you very much. The voice and the consideration from the trade unions. Thank you really for enriching our debate. I would like now to turn to Gianni Rilandini, ex-General Secretary of FIOM from Italy. Gianni, you have the floor. Gianni, can you hear us? Maybe you should open your micro. Now it's fine. Gianni, thank you.
I hope you can hear me. Yes, we can. The first thing that I want to say is that it is extremely different in the given situation to define future perspectives. I think we are still very much at the beginning of the current crisis. In Italy, 830 citizens have died in the last 24 hours. We've gone above 50,000 deaths here, and the situation here is extremely complicated. So we are still totally in the middle of the crisis and in the middle of the health catastrophe that is COVID-19. We know that, and I won't repeat here everything that's been said, but we know that, yes, the context is extremely difficult, including here in Italy. Fortunately, we now have a freeze on redundancies here. This decision to prohibit redundancies has been maintained and will be prolonged. And of course, this is directly associated to COVID-19, but we know that we're coming to an end. Around the end of February, beginning of March, all those protective measures will disappear. And that is when we will be facing an explosion in the number of redundancies. And yes, then the number of unemployed Italians will go up tremendously. What I also want to talk about is this. I want to share the fact that given the situation we face, we need to redefine the social support system, and that system has to be able to support all workers, men, women, and we need also that system to be able to cope with the different realities that workers face. I also think that such a system needs to focus on training and education. And I do advocate here the use of public funding to ensure that jobs remain on the national territory and do not end up being relocated abroad. I think all of that makes sense if we can also at the same time develop a new development model, which is able to look at workers and integrate a charter of workers' rights and a charter that also takes into account the new forms and modalities that work and labor is taking. I think that, as others have said, precariousness is becoming quite commonplace. We also know that telework is also becoming more and more commonplace, and all the new forms of labor have to be regulated. And I advocate some sort of charter of the rights of workers, which needs to be adopted. I think that in the past decades, the system that we used to have has been gradually dismantled, and all those new forms of work have eaten away at this system that we used to have. The statuses that used to exist have gone completely out of the window. Everything has changed. And for that reason, we need to build a system, and in that system also give priority to collective bargaining, both at national level, but also within companies. Now, I believe also that I was talking about this new development model. No new development model can exist if it is not really based on work. And that is why we need to rethink everything. We need to review what we do. We are indeed, as others have said, facing a huge transition from a climate point of view, from a digital point of view. And for that reason, it is absolutely essential today to be able to speak about those new challenges, those new difficulties that we're facing. There are new difficulties for trade unions and for the left or the lefts. We need unity, as Luc said, we need solidarity, but I don't think we have it yet. Not in Europe, at least. And why? Simply because the choices that we've been making in the past 10 years or decades have led to workers competing with one another. I remember that at the time when I was involved in collective bargaining and I was talking to multinational companies, I would present my demands and I would be faced not only with the employer across the table, but also sometimes I would be facing opposition from my fellow trade unionists, because obviously if you close, I would say, a factory in a given country and you relocate it abroad, someone loses, but someone gains jobs. And that is a problem. I think when we talk about solidarity, we have to admit that sometimes, well, it doesn't exist. And we need to be better organized and not just coordinate ourselves as trade unions, but truly develop a genuine solidarity. I believe that at European level, we need the trade union movement to truly establish a process that will allow individual unions to coordinate themselves better, to work together better. And that is how we can build together this new development model. I'm not going to repeat everything that's been said, which I agree with. I think the current situation is extremely volatile. We have a trade war between the US and China. Europe has to do something, because if we don't, we'll just be crushed in between, I would say, those two massive superpowers. Now, finishing, we have seen also some sectors do relatively well during the crisis, and one of the sectors that has developed is the military industry, which I think is, well, obviously something that says a lot about the type of society we live in. So I believe that we need to start working together. We need to build this new development model based on common criteria and common objectives. And we need to define the type of Europe that we want for the future. I think, unfortunately, we've made mistakes in the past. And if we want to start looking towards the future, and if we want to start thinking about this transition that will come, then choices have to be made. We've talked about the automotive industry. French colleague talked about that particular industry. I know the automotive industry quite well here in Italy. It's impossible to sort of separate it from what comes upstream and downstream of building a car. I think that if you look at Germany, it's the same. We have a strong automotive industry there, and that automotive industry is totally at the center of a long supply chain. And you need to think not only about every, I would say, link in that chain, but also all of the links, all of the supply chain. And since we're talking about the challenges that we need to face as the left, well, I think we need to look at that. I work for the Claudio Sabatini Foundation, and we have, within the framework of that foundation, looked at the automotive industry, the new challenges that we will face. We are looking at the impact of new forms of work, including automation, robotics. Well, it's obvious that workers and the left forces of Europe have to be able to understand these processes and start dealing with that. If we don't, or if we fail to do it, I think we will be running into a wall. In a couple of months or in several months, we'll be flooded with redundancies. And when people lose their jobs, well, I'm sorry, but they get angry. And when people get angry, then we're all in trouble. So we need to think about some sort of other system that we can propose. And if we look at the Europe we've been living in the past, I think unfortunately Europe has too often led or dismantled those systems. And many of those decisions have been taken not by right-wing governments, but by center or left-wing governments or coalitions. And I think that has somehow killed the credibility that we used to have. So we need to rebuild, we need to review what are our priorities. We need to come up with a genuinely new vision of Europe. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank you for inviting me to this discussion.
Mille grazie. Gianni, thank you very much. And now I turn to Kim van Sparentak, member of the European Parliament from the Greens. Hello, Kim. The floor is yours.
Hello, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak with you here tonight. I think we've already heard many comments about, the situation we're in, and also that we hopefully have learned from previous crises, not make mistakes again, and also take into account, that we need to go forward and not immediately go back to business as usual. Because we have seen that unemployment has gone up already in the recent months as the economy has come to a halt, restarted a little bit, and came to a halt again largely in recent weeks. To which extent there will be a further explosion of unemployment will also depend on the speed and the nature of the economic recovery. But one thing is clear, we can't repeat the austerity mistake. And that's why at least it's hopeful to see that we seem to have learned some lessons, and there's more willingness to have public investment to support job creation. And for now, it's again being young people that are being hit very hard, as Luc also already mentioned. Youth unemployment has already risen incredibly. And, we know that the last in, first out principle often applies, and that young people are the ones that are the last in, but also often working on temporary contracts. So we need to ensure that those coming on the labor market now will be able to find a job once the economy starts picking up again. Young people will need support to bridge this gap. And SURE was also a welcome initiative that can provide temporary relief to bridge the deepest crisis. And we should also avoid a repetition of what happened in the wake of the last crisis, when we saw that big companies found many ways to exploit young people by creating unpaid internships, more ways of bogus self-employment and platform work. What we also see, and has also already been mentioned, is that women have been hit particularly hard because they are often overrepresented in sectors such as retail and hospitality. And women are also the vast majority of care workers, nurses, staff in the elderly homes. And they have been bearing the brunt of the COVID impact in the front line. And we also see that the crisis has reinforced traditional gender roles, and advances made have been rolled back. And it's been mostly women that had to look after the children when the schools were closed, and that had been taking up leave, which had a huge impact on women's position on the labor market. Well, but the EU is going to spend 750 billion euro in the coming years on a recovery fund. And we can't get it wrong this time. The economic recovery can't be just back to business as usual. This reconstruction must not only ensure that lost livelihoods and damaged infrastructure are replaced, but that the EU's social, economic, and environmental sustainability is guaranteed. And this means a combined investment and socio-economic reform program reinforcing the robustness of health and other public services, ensuring fairness, solidarity, and stability in the economic and monetary union, and above all, doing whatever it takes to avoid the environmental catastrophe that is the biggest threat of all to our collective well-being. And I want to highlight more specifically where I believe we need to be moving towards when it comes to production and work. First of all, let's try to think for a minute what a climate neutral by 2050 really means, or closer by 60% reduction in CO2 emissions in the next 10 years. This will fundamentally impact all sectors of our economy. A lot of fossil-based and energy-intensive industries will have to undergo a fundamental transformation. Our entire industrial model needs to change. And thankfully, this evolution has already started, and there are a lot of businesses that are on board with this, or new sustainable businesses that are starting up. We need to support this move to circular, energy-efficient, climate-neutral production models by choosing where to invest wisely and set up a regulatory framework that supports this transition, for example, through strong legislation on energy efficiency, eco-design, or the right to repair. And this is why implementing the EU Green Deal is crucial. And I also believe that this new economy has the potential of creating a lot of jobs. And this also means that the jobs will be very different than today. We therefore need to support the reskilling of workers and put the skills needed for the green transition central in our education. In order to ensure that this is a just transition that leaves no one behind, we particularly need to support workers that are working now in the fossil industries and also in the heavy energy-heavy industries. And this brings us to the model of work, because not only the type of jobs should undergo a drastic change, but also how we see work. Because whilst on the one hand, the green transition is impacting the type of jobs, we also see that digitization is impacting work fundamentally. We could on the one hand see this as a challenge. Automation is endangering jobs. And that could be true looking at a micro level, and the impact of factories closing or banks closing branches are very, very real, and we need to provide a safety net for these workers. At a macro level, however, we should keep in mind that we have always turned technological advances into reduced working time, and we can have shorter work weeks. And in the Netherlands, we will be celebrating the 40-hour work week that has been introduced 100 years ago. So perhaps it's also high time to have another look at the amount of working time that we do in a week. And another thing I think that is very important is that we need to change how we measure productivity, because we can no longer rely on the old-fashioned models that look merely at economic outputs. We know that the focus on production and profit has to be part of the old economy because of the extractive and unjust nature it is. Our future society has to focus more on sectors and unpaid work that have been undervalued for way too long. Take, for example, the care sector, which the COVID crisis has showed us to be crucial. And an idea of introducing care credits can really be a tool to, on the one hand, fight the gender pension gap, but is also part of a more socially just model where what puts our human values at the center rather than the economy. So I think when we are really looking at, you know, what will be the future of work, on the one hand, we have to make sure that, you know, we don't become robots ourselves and that we are not being guided by algorithms. And on the other hand, we have to make sure that what we value in each other is what is at the core of our society. And that's why I would say that, you know, the future of work and the future of our society has to be human-centered and has to be based on ethics and on humanity. Thank you.
Your micro. Si tu peux ouvrir ton micro.
Ça y est, c'est bon. Vous m'entendez?
Bien.
Merci,
Oui,
Marisa.
All right, thank you.
Merci à toutes et à tous. Je vais essayer de rester
Thank you.
parole 6 minutes. Je vais essayer de rester dans.
So I try to respect the time that was given to me. First, I have to say that I also represent Generation. I'm a former member of Parliament of Generation, and now I'm unemployed. I'm a job seeker, so I know what I'm going to speak about here. And as you said in your introduction, Marisa, it is true that we're facing an unprecedented crisis, and we need unprecedented tools and measures. I'm not going to repeat what was said, but I would like to send a warning, because I'm afraid that with the current crisis, the current pandemic, we'll have the same situation as in 2008. In 2008, the crisis was not linked to the workers. We had no responsibility whatsoever in that 2008 crisis, but the citizens, the workers had to pay to foot the bill. The price tag was for us, and we're still paying for it, by the way. Now, I'm afraid that after this pandemic, we'll get back to the same tools, same liberal measures to make us pay again the solution to the crisis, because we will have to pay the debt. Liberals keep saying that, the right keeps saying that, okay, 750 billion, yet who's going to pay for that? They said all the time, so they're preparing us mentally with that. So we'll have to see them make more profit, more productivity, more dismissals. So let's be careful. Also, when I was at the Parliament in 2014, I was the one who started what's currently at the European Parliament as a debate. That's the adjustment at the borders, because we're to protect the environment, protect the planet, but also to fight against unfair competition. And in 2014, many people have been telling me that it was utopian, a utopist. Well, I'm very happy to see today that this is a true debate and that we'll have a legislation tomorrow. So let's be careful, because the carbon adjustment at the border should not be taken away from its main purpose. So we should not give the multinational companies another opportunity to get free subsidies to make even more money for the shareholders. So I'm thinking here, and I'm looking into some possible avenues that could be useful for all of us. So we need to massively reduce working hours. We need to massively reduce working hours, but we should not reduce wages, because they say, okay, fine, you'll work less, but then you'll make less, you know, proportionally. And I say, no, thank you. Let's keep up the wages. So I already hear some that say that it's going to be too costly. This completely utopian. So let's look at the costs of unemployment for years. It costs a lot of money, millions of unemployed people. What's the price of dismissals? We are footing the bill there. So we are also facing this liberal speech, right-wing speech that makes us feel guilty. They say we want to take down the economy. They are taking down our economy. And it was said by the previous speaker that they've been working 40 hours a week for 100 years. Now we need to massively reduce working hours. Now there's another item I wanted to tackle here, which I believe is important. That's the social status. And it was said before by the Italian comrade, but the social status today in Europe only exists through the working contract, the labor contract. Workers have a social status thanks to the company, so to speak, thanks to their work contract. Once they're dismissed, they're being fired, they lose their social status. They're entitled to nothing. So we'd like the social status to be linked not to a company, but to a citizen, to a worker. And this social status should be there during their whole lives when they are working or retired, with high level of social protection, right to holidays, paid holidays, social support, training, and so on. So the status should be for citizens and not companies. And finally, training. Training is hugely important. And I believe that we need to start a European Marshall Plan on the right for training, massive training for workers. Now, the digitization of the economy is fine. I say congratulations for that. But the risk is that it will be used to socially exclude people. So what shall we do with the least qualified people? Are they going to face more precarious situations again? So digitization should go in hand with a plan where nobody is left in the margin. Nobody should be left aside. And finally, we need to speak about environmental transformation. Of course, I say yes, 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 but there is no environmental transition without a social transition. And there again, decisions should not fall from the sky, from I don't know where and what pyramid of a government. No, let's propose a new method. So every one of us should become a key player of transformation. Not everything should be decided from the European capitals. Now we need to work per region in employment areas. We need to implement social democracy tools, and all stakeholders must sit around a table and think. They should think about economic, social, and environmental tools that are necessary according to the regions and the situations of the people. So nobody should be left on the side with that. Trade union organizations are the workers' representatives, business, local and national elected representatives, civil society and NGOs. Everybody should work together to make those choices. Otherwise, we'll be preaching in a desert. There will be great titles in the news, but only speeches, because we need the support of society. Society, people should support us because they feel they're concerned and they've been involved in the choices made. This is the only way to perform this or carry out this transformation. I will stop there. I don't want to waste your time, but just one thing. Today's utopia must become tomorrow's reality. So let's go for it. Let's stop being distracted by neoliberal nonsense. So people are not too expensive. We work for people. And so we're having a debate at the European Parliament on the carbon adjustment of the borders, because we need to protect the planet. We need to protect climate, and we need to fight against unfair competition. But unfair competition is not only environmental, it is also social. And so I say, let's go for it, people. Let's demand that there's a European status and there is a social adjustment, because this is the other factor for unfair competition. Thank you. Hope I didn't speak too long. Thank you. No, thank you, Edward.
But not least speaker. So I would like to ask Karoli Georgi, International Secretary of Hungarian Alliance of Trade Unions, to take the floor. Karol, it's yours.
Thank you very much. I'm in a bit peculiar situation because nearly everything has been said before me. And at the same time, I'm able to sum up a little bit, but I'm not going to do that. I leave it to you. Just a question, what are we focusing on as trade unions? Prior to the pandemic, our main points were quality, safe and healthy jobs, fair remuneration, equality between men and women, precarious work, especially for young people, transition in the labor market triggered by the climate change and digitalization. I'm not going to elaborate on them too much. Luc did already so, and also other speakers. And now after the pandemic, or being in the middle of the pandemic, the immense effects on the life and jobs of working men and women, and the search for recovery, and the search for a new normal. This is exactly what we are trying to discuss about. We trade unions are addressing how to create an alternative economic model that brings benefits to workers and people rather than only to employers and shareholders. We stand for a fair redistribution of wealth, achievable through application of international standards and strong collective bargaining and just taxation. The key to delivering prosperity and a just transition for all, and not just for a few, is a stronger bargaining and an end to attacks on trade unions from employers and governments. We have seen it also in Hungary over the past couple of months during the pandemic, that trade union rights and workers' rights have been very seriously curtailed. In March, the labor code was practically set aside by government decree under the exceptional situation, the emergency situation. Securing a just transition in the labor market, the economy, and in society, and building a social model after years of austerity and misguided structural reforms, and now in the pandemic crisis, are among the future priorities of our movement. A just transition with our full involvement, as previously emphasized, in order that no one to be left behind. And especially in my region, the Central and Eastern European countries, in terms of the climate change, the necessary adjustment of the industries is really something which Luc already referred to. His discussion with our colleagues in Poland or in Bulgaria, Romania. Of course, at European level, unions are also developing our work around migration, refugees, mobility, and employment rights, which are high on the agenda. Something very important, we must step up against the attempts to divide workers and stand up for democratic values and democracy in society and the workplace. We also think that having more European legislation and or more European agreements with employers and workers' rights can be part of the solution. And here I'd really like to make a reference to the Commission's recent initiative on the adequate minimum wage, with special emphasis on strengthening collective bargaining, stricter rules for public funding, public procurement, and increasing the unacceptably low minimum wages, which is a concrete example how our trade union demands can get on board. And here the European Parliament will have a very significant role to play, because trade unions, we have concrete proposals and concrete initiatives to improve this Commission initiative. Our issue is to establish a dividing line between decency and poverty. It is unacceptable that today in 17 EU member states out of the 27, the minimum wage is lower than that. We say that if someone works full-time, they should not be forced to choose between heating and eating. Because today this is the case. In Hungary, approximately 1/3 of the working people earn around or below the minimum wage, which is below the poverty line. As unions, we have the tool to do collective bargaining if we are strong enough and united. And this is why this is so much important. Presently, we can cover on the European level, only 61% of European workers by collective agreements. In my country, in Hungary, only 21%, every fifth worker. And what do we need? We need better cooperation of the progressive democratic forces, political left, and trade unions, as Edward also referred to solidarity. We need to be more proactive, more visible, and we be in the center of the social debate. if we manage to do so. And we need to get better organized, of course. We need activism, getting back to the roots of trade unionism of 100-something years ago, and for that, trade union education. And let me mention 3 concrete challenges, which I think will be extremely important also for the post-COVID pandemic period. About just some figures, the micro and small and medium enterprises. In the European Union, in 2018, there were 25,000 micro, small and medium enterprises. Of that, 23,300,000, less than 5 workers employed. They are the micro one. That means that around 98 million employed, approximately 66% of the workforce are within this micro, small and medium enterprise segment employed. Out of that, 44 million by the micro ones. And these are the ones totally beyond the reach of trade unions today. And that is something which we have to address, and for which we need to look for regulatory frameworks in order to have collective bargaining and collective bargaining coverage, protection for them. The second, self-employed. Gianni gave a good idea to have a charter, but a charter will function only if it is covering the self-employed and the so-called non-traditional employment colleagues, and if they are applicable and enforceable. And the third one, which I think is an eternal problem for the trade unions and collective interest representation. While capital has been globalized and is functioning on a global level, trade unions are still organizing the workers at within the national boundaries. The German trade unions are responsible for firstly, for their voluntarily due-paying members. The Hungarian trade unions, the same. The Italians, again. At the same time, capital is misusing that. So we need to find a way. In the European Trade Union Confederation, I remember back 20 years ago, we tried and we made a decision in the Congress in Helsinki to establish a European Trade Union membership. That is something we will have to address. And for that, we might need the political support of the parties and the progressive and democratic forces. So that's what I wanted to tell, because I can only subscribe to most what I heard today, and I didn't want to repeat it. Thanks a lot.
So thank you very much for your intervention. I understand we have received 2 questions up to now, and they are addressed to specific of our speakers. So let me say the first question, it's for you, dear Carolee. It's from Attila Vainai, if I'm expressing well the name. So let me say what he asks. Dear Carolee Gergi, what do you think? Who will suffer in case of veto of Orban and Duda? This is addressed to you as a question. Please open your micro because we cannot listen to you.
Yes.
It's a specific question, understand?
I was expecting something like that because my country in Hungary, this has been the topic #1 in the public speech and in the political speech and in the media over the past couple of days. And also for a longer time, rule of law. First of all, to reply to colleague Vainai, who will suffer most? the people. It's so easy, because what the Hungarian government has been planning and has already taken huge credit on the free market, which according to economists and experts will cost much more over the coming 30 years for the next generation than if the Hungarian government would have made use of the recovery fund. This is one thing. The second is that the use of any public money like that is totally misguided by political, economic interests of a few in power. And third, we as trade unions, also with colleagues from Poland and the Czech Republic, have addressed ourselves with regard to the rule of law to our governments and also to the European institutions, because we say that rule of law for us as workers and trade unions has a significant meaning for the rule of law in the world of work. Without workers' rights and without applying trade union collective rights, there is no functioning and no industrial peace. It is a fundament on which our democracy and trade union and workers' rights are based. This is a pillar without which our societies, economies, labor markets cannot function. This is a principle which guarantees a social peace and social dialogue in our countries and also in Europe and all around in the globe. It is not possible simply to have good wages and upward social convergence in Europe without legal stability and transparency provided by the rule of law. And we are simply confused and deeply confused that our democratically elected governments are opposing that basic principle. I'm sorry that I spoke so much on that, but I think this is the real core issue. And the consequences will be paid by the people.
So thank you very much. Our second question is addressed to Gianni Rinaldini from Eleonore Stulgens. Let me read the question. She says, good evening, thank you for this conference. Do you already have some ideas regarding how to regulate new forms of work? And she would like to have your response, particularly for teleworking, for smart work and distance work. So Gianni, if you would like to ask to respond to this question.
Va bene.
All right. Well, I already spoke about the Charter of Rights. And with this charter, I meant a charter that would not, how can I say, that would not simply be a copy and paste of what we saw before on the workers' status. Today, we're facing a specific context with different working modalities and the fragmentation of the labor market. And so the current situation implies that we face different considerations. We have freelance workers, people who sometimes freelance, sometimes not. We also have to take remote work now, which is another factor. We also have to take into account that people have different ways to work. So you have to know that we have people working in warehouses, in hubs for logistics, so they work in different fields and ways. When I spoke about this Charter of Rights, it's a new charter covering all workers and all types of jobs. Because there's an increasing number of types of jobs. Choices were made, of course, by the governments, and we need to cover new jobs, new types of jobs. So this charter should become the starting point for a new reflection on Europe and to create a new model of development. To this, we need to add negotiations. Why? Because this is a charter of values. This is a charter for workers. Well, this charter will be important. I was thinking what our comrade from Hungary was saying. Hungary recognizes work as a fundamental value that should be protected. And so there should be their freedom to express a different point of view through a trade union representation. Now, there are different types of jobs, and we need to define and regulate these new types of jobs, but this should be covered by the right to negotiate within the companies at the national level, but also collective negotiations and bargaining should be put on the table. We saw something quite specific recently. There were references made to the US model, where the unions are corporate unions. In the companies, you don't have national unions like we do. So the representation of the workers is seen differently. Their approach is different. So we have a national collective agreement, which is a concept relying on the solidarity between the workers. So thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much. Now we have a question that comes from our rapporteur, Enrique Carmona. I will give him directly the floor, and I would suggest that we could have a short answer from Fabien, from Kim, and from Edouard, since they haven't answered already. And of course from Luc, because it also concerns the trade unions. So,
muy bien.
Can we hear you?
Pues,
yes.
Muchas gracias. Vamos deprisa.
Well, thank you very much. We'll go quickly. It's not a difficult question, but we are going to try to address it in a very practical way. After listening to the different panelists, we see that there's a clear need to open spaces for the left and that are adequate for left political parties, trade unions. We need a space for the left. How can we open these workspaces to be able jointly to present proposals to workers, to citizens, to show them that we are working together, not only at a national level, but at a European level? How can we open a workspace like this where we can organize specific proposals for citizens and well, trade unions to have more members and left parties to have more votes? Thank you.
So I would like to ask now for a 2-minute answer, if it's possible, from, first of all, Fabien, if you would like to take the floor. Maybe you could open your micro.
Merci. Pour répondre directement.
Thank you. I'll answer to the question directly, but I think with a simple answer also. It's up to us, I mean, all of us here, to put down on paper some proposals that hopefully we agree on. And I've heard many interesting proposals that have been made here tonight. And I think we do agree on a lot of things that need to be done to review our production system, to deal with this health crisis, and to truly start the environmental or the ecological transition. We've also talked a lot about the need to regulate telework. We can write this down on a piece of paper and have some sort of meaningful proposal. We've all talked about working time. I think if we can do something on working time, it's going to change the way society operates and the way it produces. And then we've insisted a lot on public services that are really at the service of people and funded, of course, also by the EU. So these are just a few ideas. It's just a first, first draft, I would say, of what we could start working on. And then if we can identify 3 or 4 key ideas, well expressed, clear, that we can share and convey to the workers of Europe, both working for the private sector and the public sector, that would make sense because it would send a clear and understandable message. A message that is on security of jobs, security of people, and that meets human needs and the needs of nature as well.
Now I would like to ask for a short answer also from Luc. Luc, you have the floor.
Yeah, so I'm in charge of a European federation where we have unions affiliated from the north of Europe, from the south, from the east, from the west, and the diversity is very high in our organization. And I think what we need to do is to focus not on those points where we might not have always the same opinion, but focus more on all the points, and there are many where we do have the same opinion. We all want to fight for a fair Europe. We all want to fight for a social society, for an inclusive society, for a democratic society where human rights, where women's rights, where trade union rights are respected. Well, I don't think that there is much divergence in opinion on all these fundamental rights. So I think with a progressive agenda on the points where we all agree, we should be able to connect the left. Okay, as I said in the start, there are different opinions and there are different angles in our movement, but there is also a lot of convergence and a lot of cohesion and a lot of solidarity in our movement. And I think if we stick on these points together and we give clear messages, not difficult political messages, but clear messages which really touch on the daily life of people, on their work life, on their right for living in a democratic society, for being LGBTQ or whatever, and so on. If we focus on these rights, then I think we can indeed move the society. And I think that's a responsibility of all of us. We shouldn't look to right or extreme right and blame them. We also have to look to us and indeed join forces and indeed create that common agenda. We as trade union, we show that it's possible. Despite our different realities and our different starting points, we show that it's possible to create unity in a number of points on our agenda. So why shouldn't we be able to do that as well at the political level?
Thank you very much, Luc. Now I would like to ask Kim if she would like to intervene for a short answer.
Yes, thank you so much. I think it's a very important question. Let's first of all start indeed with what Fabien also said. There are many ideas and they're floating around. Like, we don't have to get together and try to reinvent the wheel. You know, we can have a look at the ideas that are floating around and see what we think about them. But how do we make sure that we get enough critical mass to actually make them happen? And to also make sure that, you know, the left increases again in terms of votes and in terms of, you know, being part of the discussions of the people. You know, what is now on the agenda of the people is perhaps not the things that we are discussing tonight, at least not the macro level. So what I think is very important, and I come from an activist background, and I've been an organizer in several movements. And the first thing you have to do is start talking with the people around you, start talking with the people in your community, start hearing and listening what their problems are, and what they would think of the ideas that we are talking about today and that are already floating around. And then we can go further, but we can't like if we criticize politicians and governments coming from the top and deciding what we need to do, we can't do it ourselves either. So we have to go out into our communities. We have to talk with the people. What do they need? What do they want? Where is that spot on the horizon where we all want to go? I think we can all agree on where we want to go. We want a more social Europe. We want a more just Europe. We want a more equitable Europe. But how to get there can depend per country, can depend per community. And that's where we have to start with building the critical mass to create change in Europe.
Thank you, Kim. I will now turn to Edouard, and then I think Fabien would like to add a word. And there are still two short questions. I will explain who has asked, and maybe we will have a volunteer to ask. So, Edouard.
Merci Marisa. Très brièvement.
Thank you, Marie-Lisa. No, I completely agree with you, Kim, there. I think there is a crisis of representation. Whether you're trade unionists, politicians, you're supposed to represent people, but there is a crisis there. Yes, Luc said that trade unions represent millions of workers in Europe, but let's not forget what Carolee said. Solidarity often ends at the border of your own country. And we need to do something about this. So yes, as you said, we need to go and talk to people. Let's not think, as we always seem to be doing, that we know it all, that we know we have all the answers. No, I think what we need to do is use a simple process called consultation. That means talking to people, and that means asking workers, for example, what they would do if they were in charge. What would be the main priority that we would go for, socially speaking? And then we can build a sort of, I would say, platform and turn people into co-legislators, because often we have this divide between people and their elected representatives. So if we can establish some sort of consultation or whatever other system that works, as long as we can talk to people directly in an unfiltered manner. So we take away all the filters, we talk to them, we hear them. I don't know it all. And I think if I'm able to listen to people, and if we're all able to listen to people, we'll be much more representative and relevant.
Jan, since you will add a remark, there is an additional question to his question from, I understand, from Mark Shapiro, who is asking how can we find coverages in each of the parties and also with all the social forces, trade unions and so on, in order to advance demands relating to the improvement of work in Europe that are common to all and that federate all our movements to become stronger. So maybe you could combine your question with your answer to this question and to your previous point.
Oui, merci. Je voulais ajouter...
Thank you. I wanted to add a concrete proposal in reaction to what Kim was saying earlier. And I'll answer to the extra question in passing. I think, yes, there is convergence between left-wing movements and parties. I'm sure we can agree on at least 3 or 4 big ideas. I think there is so much, I would say, people are angry. There is anger in Europe, and we need to hear and listen to that anger. If we don't do that, then people will be voting for populist parties, for nationalist parties, and for extreme right parties. And that is why it might be useful, I think, to join forces when I say join forces, I'm talking about progressive left-wing forces, and then talk to people, answer to people, tell them something, and show to them that we have proposals and that what is happening now and the difficult life that they have, that we can do something about that. So I think if we could, I don't know, it's a proposal I'm going to make here, we could produce a short video clip, 3 or 4 minutes, with people from various countries, and we could talk about an issue and then conclude this short clip with 2 or 3 concrete proposals, just to show that across countries in Europe, we can be together, we can listen, and we can come up with possible solutions. And that is also a way to show to people that they can have hope and that they can maybe find solutions to their problems. So a short video clip is easy to produce. It's easy to disseminate on many different platforms and channels. And that would be a good way to show people that we work and we talk to each other and we can have solutions for them.
Now, we have 2 questions, and if there is a volunteer, please let us know. So we have, let me find it. We have a question from Simon. He asks about young people, among others, and who will be particularly affected by the consequences of COVID health crisis, especially increase of unemployment. And isn't this crisis an opportunity to launch a European offensive against the precarious situation of young people, free education, minimum income, allow them to freely emancipate? I think many of our speakers have already pointed out this aspect. Would somebody would like to take the floor on this? Okay, Luke, I understand, would like. Luke, please. And then we have a last question I will tell you after Luke answers.
Well, yes, I think it's absolutely not only requested, but it's also crucial, because if not, we are going again to a lost generation. Because we are facing, and it's also said by Gianni in the beginning, we are only at the start of the crisis. The dismissals and the redundancies and people losing the jobs, and indeed youth going to be hit by this crisis is going to increase next year. That's absolutely clear, and that's going to happen. So, and then the Youth Guarantee Program that the European Union now launched, and the programs they now launched also in July, are far, far, far too weak. So Europe has nice promises made in the past towards youth, but now when the time is there to deliver, and when it's burning for young people about their future and about whether or not they will find a decent job and not a precarious job, Europe is in reality almost invisible. So in that sense, when we talk about recovery, we need certainly to focus on a future for young people. If not, they fall into years of precariousness or unemployment. So at least I can tell you that for us as trade union movement and in industrial trade union movement, during our executive committee this week, we had a specific motion also on this topic. And we see the danger. And as I said, it depends which country you're coming from. If you're talking to colleagues from Sweden and Denmark, they might have a more moderate approach on this topic. But once you go into Southern Europe, and when you go into Eastern Europe and also Central Europe, the situation is dramatic for young people. And I also explained it already in my first introduction that if we don't find solutions, the immigration of young people and young qualified people from those countries to other parts of Europe is going to continue and will even increase. Do know that in regions in Bulgaria, but also in Romania and in other parts of Eastern Europe, we are faced today with empty villages, completely empty, where only retired people remain and all the others left. In 5 years' time, 1/4 of all the doctors in Romania left the country. So we have a huge inequality problem and a huge imbalance in Europe, and this cannot be the Europe that we can support. And young people are indeed, in that sense, the first victims of this inequality. And so we need to deliver in this recovery program a lot to those most vulnerable groups, and it has already been mentioned: young people, precarious workers, female workers, and so on.
Thank you very much, Luke. Since I'm afraid we need to conclude in the next 3 minutes, I think it has been a very fruitful discussion and very promising discussion also. It's clear that we share the same concerns about what the pandemic crisis is now accelerating, and also as a pretext for many governments to attack workers' rights, working time, and also how this will evolve in the future. And it also, I think we all have stressed the importance of putting forward an alternative, progressive left agenda, how important it is to work together. Trade unions, we need to ensure collective bargaining, we need to ensure trade union rights. I must tell you, in Greece, at the present, with the neoliberal government, we have a huge attack against working hour, salaries, trade union rights, and I understand from all our speakers that in many countries we are facing the same. I think we all stressed the need of a fair transition regarding a pact, a social environmental pact that will have a progressive agenda, a progressive direction. And also it's very interesting what has been said about young people and women. I must tell you that we have 64% of the unemployment at this stage in Greece is women. And also, as you well said, about young people. We need to address the issue of distance work, smart work, new forms of work. The question is how to regulate, how to consider them with contracts, how the collective bargainings will also concern this new type of work. We need to unite forces, all left, progressive, socialist, green parties, movements, trade unions. And I find very important what has been said from many of our speakers tonight, that of course we have some positive steps like the recovery plan and fund, but it's important to see what rules will rule these new policies that we have the chance now to implement. And we should, in our agenda, have specific rules for job creation, for ensuring jobs, and not, of course, reducing salaries. I understand also that the reduction of working time has been raised by many of our speakers. Of course, there are differences. I understand from our Hungarian friend, I understand from our Italian friend, from the Spanish minister, I can tell you also from Greece, that southern countries and also Eastern European countries, we also have some specific problems. But I think that is the importance of discussing all together and paving a common alternative, progressive and left proposal for the future. I will end with one remark. In the 90s, we had the first big deregulation against workers, against social state, against all the social agenda we had conquered with all our social and working fights during 100 years ago. And then during the financial crisis from 2008 and onwards, we had the austerity policy, we have the institutionalization in the European Union of neoliberal policies, and specifically countries like Greece, Portugal, but other countries also, that Ireland, Spain, that have suffered through these austerity policies, and Italy also. I take what Kim said, that we cannot make the same mistake once more. So, dear comrades and friends, I think we should be strong, we should be united, and also, because Edouard spoke about vision, we have to dream first, Mandela said, in order to conquer what we dream. So we should not let this crisis to be a further deregulation in the fourth industrial and digital revolution. We need to have people, we need to have the social movement, we need to have the progressive forces that set the rules, and not the banks and the multinationals and the financial global markets. I think all this unites us, and I really hope that we will have the chance in the near future to meet all together, not only through a teleconference, but from a real meeting together. Thank you very much all for this very important and interesting discussion. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.